to the end. Ezra Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Yud Beis, and we are starting from Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amid Beis by just after the Gemara. So basically, let's just review that what discussing the last topic probably in this Masechta is the topic of Ir Hanidachas, which means you have a city that was subverted by people. Two people from the city got up and tried to convince everybody to do Avodah Zarah. So the din is the people, if most of the city, let's say 60% of the city did Avodah Zarah, even if the two people who convinced them to do Avodah Zarah did not do any Avodah Zarah, they just get skila for convincing the city. But the people in the city that did the Avodah Zarah, because they're a city, not as an individual, we judge them that they all get killed with the sayif, with the sword, and which is less of a misa than skila. And what else happens to them is that all the possessions of the city is destroyed. No one's allowed to take anything from it, and they should raise the city, and it should never be rebuilt. That's what we learned in our Mishnah. So now we're just going to darshan a few understanding it much deeper from reading the psukim. The Gemara darshans like this: Tan Rabbanim. Here, hold on. Tan Rabbanim. The rabbis taught. All right. Can you see me? Okay. Tan Rabbanim. The rabbis taught. Yatsu hein v'loy shluchim. It means that two people of the city came and they themselves convinced the other people to do Avodah Zarah. It's they themselves. They didn't send any messengers or two people who are residents of the city went out and they convinced the city to do Avodah Zarah. Anashim. It says two people. Ein anashim pachas mebeim. So we need two people who are the subverters. Davar acha, another message from the word anashim. It means anashim v'loy nashim, a men and not women. Anashim v'loy ketanim, and not young people on the bar mitzvah. Remember, when it comes to one person convincing another person to do avodah zarah, the Torah says women, who do that are chayiv skila. That's called a mesis. When you convince an entire city to do avodah zarah, you are called a mediach. Okay, and there, in order to be considered a mediach, you have to be a man, and it has to be two men. Bnei Belial. These are people who convinces a city to do avodah zarah. These are people without responsibility. They remove the yoke of heaven from their necks. People who we know are bad people, and they came and convinced the city to do avodah zarah. Mikir bercha. Mikir bercha teaches you that an ir nedachas is v'loy min hasafor. It's in order to raise a city and burn a whole city of the Jewish people, it has to be a city that's not by the border of Israel, because if the border towns of Israel are turned into a raised city, then that gives the enemy opportunity to take over this place. So the city, in order for Ir Anidachas to be an Ir Anidachas, it has to be somewhere in between, in middle of Israel. Yoshvei Iram. The people who are doing the subverting are people who are residences of the city. They can't be residences of another city. They have to actually live in the city. And they broke away from the city and made announcements that everybody do avodah zarah. Lamer, this teaches you for each and every one of the madichem, the two guys that get up and convince everybody to do avodah zarah. You have to warn them, hey, if you're going to do this and convince the city to do avodah zarah, you're going to get schila. Now, the Mishnah, it says that, okay, so now the Gemara is going to bring a machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. When Yehoshua, let's say, divided up Israel into different domains, right? Let's say Shevet Reuven got, Shevet Zvulun got this and Naphtali got that, right? Zvulun and Naphtali. Let's say on the border between Zvulun and Naphtali, there was a city that Yeshua now has to divide up. That's half of the city is in Naphtali's domain, and half the city is in Zvulun's domain. So how did Yeshua divide it up? So Rabbi Yochanan says, Cholkin ir achas l'shnei shvatim. You divide it up for two shvatim. Two shvatim live in that city. You could have a city that belongs to Shevet Zvulun and Shevet Naphtali. You don't divide a city into two shvatim. That's what Rish Lakish says. So the Gemara asks a question. So that means if it's mostly in Zvulun, you give it to Zvulun. If it's mostly in Naphtali, even though it overlaps into Zvulun's domain, you give it to Naphtali. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan Shlakish. Rabbi Yochanan asked Rabbi Shlakish, the two people that convince, we learned in our Mishnah that the two people that convince the other people in the city to do Avodah Zarah have to be somewhat from the same shevet. They have to be from that city and from that shevet, which implies that a possibility for an Ir and Dachas could be a city that's inhabited by two different shvatim. So that seems to align itself with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, not Rish Lakish, because Rabbi Lakish says that every city had one shevet in it. My love doesn't mean even though the subverters live in that city, if they're part of that shevet, yes, and if they're not part of that shevet, then they're not considered medichem. In other words, let's say the city belongs to shevet Zvulun and Naphtali, and only shevet Naphtali did the Avodah Zarah, then the subverters have to be from shevet Zvulun. Shevet Naphtali, if they're from Shevet Zvulun, not. So what you do see is that Shmamina Cholkin Ir Achas Beishvatim. Our Mishnah seems to align itself with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that you divide a city for two shvatim. Answers the Gemara, no, it's not so. The Nafkale Birusha Iname Diahabulu Lehale Bematana. What it means is that even if the city, let's say, has residences of one shevet, it's possible to have one person living there who actually belonged from another shevet. Now, how did he, buy a property in this land, in this city? Either it was given to him as a gift from somebody, or he got it through his mother's side, whose mother's side did not have any yorshim, and his mother's from another shevet. So he got it, and that's how he became a resident of the city. But 99% of the people living in the city belonged to one shevet. So that's the opinion of Rish Lakish. Eisvei, so comes along. We ask a question. We learned in Sefer Yeshua, Aram Teisham Eishnei Shvatim Eila. There were 9 cities gifted by two different shvatim. The two different shvatim are from Shevet Yehuda and Shevet Shimon. They gave 9 cities as a donation and gave it to the Levium. The Levium didn't have anywhere to live, so Yehuda and Shimon gave them nine cities. Now, how do you divide up 9 cities between two shvatim? It must be that each one of them gave 4.5. My love, Arbo Palgamahai. So 4.5 went from one shevet, 4.5 was gifted to the Levium from another shevet. So we see it's possible for one shevet to own half a city. So you see the same idea, like Rabbi Yochanan said, that you can divide one city into two shvatim. And that's how it was possible for one of the shvatim to have a half a city. Answers the Gemara, loy. Every shevet owned a whole city. There's no halves. When Yeshua divided it up, it was a whole city. But was the two that donated, Shevet Yehud and Shevet Shimon, one of them gave 4, and one of them gave 5. One of them gave 5 cities to Levi, and one of them only gave 4. Says the Gemara, why didn't the Pasuk say which one gave more? Why does it lump them together that they all gave 9? They should say, this Shevet gave 4, and this Shevet gave even one more, gave 5 to Shevet Levi. So we go to the top of Daf Yomi Beis Kasha. This is a difficult question, but not. Now we go to another question. We said that there has to be somebody that convinces the city to do Avodah Zarah. 2 people. Let me ask you a question. If they all convince themselves to do Avodah Zarah, most of the city convinced themselves to do Avodah Zarah, what would be the din? Vayadichu Amar Rachman, the Torah wants that in order to be an Ir and Dachas, you have 2 people subverting the city, and not that they did it on their own. Or maybe even if they convince themselves on their own, if most of the city did Avodah Zarah, they become an Ir Anidachas. Tashma, come here. Hidichu Nashim Ketanim. If women and children were the subverters, the convincers. So then it's not an ir nidachas. So the Gemara says, okay, but it means that women and children got up and said, "Oh, do avodah zarah," and most of the city did avodah zarah. Then it doesn't become an ir nidachas because the convincers were women and children. Says the Gemara, "Amai, but why? Ignore the women and children. Let it be as if they convince themselves to do avodah zarah, and it should be an ir nidachas. So it must be that even if you convince yourself to do avodah zarah, the city does not become an ir nidachas." And says the Gemara, no. The truth is, if you convince yourself, if the city convinced themselves to do avodah zarah, they are an ir nidachas. So hanach basa nafshai griri. When a person comes up with the idea himself, he's going to stick with the idea. So therefore, you do become an ir nidachas if you convince yourself. If all the people convince themselves to do avodah zarah without anybody convincing them, that's for sure. But hani, when you have women and children convincing you to do avodah zarah, you're going after the convincing of women and children. So maybe you're not going to stick with it. So therefore, the Torah exempt the city from becoming an ir nidachas because they were convinced by women and children, and therefore they were not so connected to the avodah zarah. Now, we learned in the Mishnah that at least 60% of the city has to do avodah zarah. Then you consider an ir nidachas. So the Gemara is asking a basic question: Heicha avdin, how do we determine if 60% of the city did avodah zarah? I mean, because if one person does avodah zarah, he gets skila. If 60% of the city did avodah zarah, you get sreifa. So what do? Amar Rav Yehuda. So what do you do until you get to the 60%? Amar Rav Yehuda said, "Donin, you make a judgment of each person. V'chayvshin, you put him in jail. Donin v'chayvshin, and then when you reach the 60% mark, so now you have 60% of the city that did avodah zarah. After these cases, you go back and give them sreifa." That's no good because you're causing people that are getting the death penalty and you're holding them in jail until the process is completed. And we know that when somebody is committed and sentenced to the death penalty, we give them the death penalty right away. So we should give these people right away skila. So Ula says like this: Donin, we make a judgment. V'cycling, we give skila to each one of the people until you reach 60% or 51%, basically. Then afterwards, anybody who we judge after that, now we give them sreifa, donim v'cycling, and then afterwards, those that join that we down them after the 51%, they will get sreifa, but the first ones get skila. Itma, we learned in the Brisa, a teaching, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan said, Donim v'cycling. We judge, give them skila, exactly what Ula said. And then afterwards, the ones that hit the 51% mark, the next ones will get sreifa. Rish Lakish has another idea. Let's bring in a bunch of judges, and in one day, down the whole city, get them all to judge at one time, and then you'll figure out in one day, everybody, you'll examine if you have 51%. So therefore, it's not ma'ane adin because nobody's waiting around. They're just waiting, a couple of hours till they finish the judgment of the entire city, and then we'll decide if the city should get sreifa, or if they didn't make the 50% mark, then they get skila. Says the Gemara, ir nidachas is not judged by the normal judges. You need the people in Sanhedrin. Eini, it's not so. Only a man and woman, an individual, gets judged by a regular judgment. But a whole city, in order to judge a whole city to be an ir nidachas, they have to go to Yerushalayim to the Sanhedrin and there be judged. So how does Rish Lakish's idea work? You're not going to bring the whole Sanhedrin to the city. Ella, so the Rish Lakish's idea was like this: they bring a lot of judges and they examine the mishpat and they say, oh, most of these guys, if we were deciding it, will be guilty. Then then they put all the city onto a bus and bring them to Yerushalayim, the whole city on a bus. and then and there in the Bezdin Hagadol they'll decide, finish up their judgment. Bekatlu, and then we'll give all these people sreifa, and then we'll burn down the whole city. Haki, again, you can see how unlikely it is to find a whole city as an irani dachas. It's so hard. Hake sakes yashvia. But after the Torah tells you that you destroy the possessions of the people of the city. Tanarabana, chameres, vangamelis, or iveris, mimakam lamakam, if a guy who's in a caravan or like a wagon driver, and he comes to the city and stayed there for 30 days, and he did avodah zarah, so then he becomes part of the ir and the dachas, and he gets the knife, and his money is destroyed. Pachas makam, but if he only stayed in a hotel for less than 30 days, and he did avodah zarah, hein beskili, he gets only skila or moin and polet, but his money is saved because he's not part. He's not considered an ir and dachas. He's considered like an individual that did avodah zarah. Says the Gemara, Reminu, let me ask you a question. It seems to me that in order to be part of a city, all you need to be there is for 30 days. So, but we learned in a brisa, how long do you have to be in a city to be like the inhabitants of the city that you're required to pay for taxes? So the brisa says, Yud Beis Chodesh, you have to live there 12 months. So how do you reconcile with our Mishnah, which says that without the brisa that says that they need to be there just 30 days? Rav says it's not like Kash, it's not so difficult. To be considered a dweller of the city, so then you an actual resident of the city, you need to be there for 12 months. But if you want to be somebody who is considered somebody who's living in the city, so then all you need is 30 days. Vatanya, and that's what we learned in the Brisa. There's a difference. Hamuda hana mibnei oya. Somebody says, I'm never having a na from somebody who is a person from the city. Somebody who's a New Yorker, let's say. So what makes a New Yorker? If the person lived in New York for 12 months, you have to follow your neder, and you said you're not going to benefit from that person. So to make you a New Yorker, you have to be there for 12 months. But if a guy was living there only 10 months, then you're allowed to have benefit from him. But if the guy makes a neder, I'm not having benefit from somebody who lives in New York, so he's not a New Yorker, but he's living in New York. So if he's there for 30 days, then he's living in New York. They're not allowed to benefit from him. But if it's less than that, then you're permitted to benefit from him. So that's the idea. In order to for a caravan driver to be part of the city, all he needs to be there is living there for 30 days. And if he does avodah zarah along with the rest of the city, then he has a din of sreifa and his possessions are burnt. Then we learned in the Mishnah, you have to destroy everything that's inside the city. That means that the people who didn't do avodah zarah obviously are not going to get sreifa. So let's say 60% did avodah zarah, 40% didn't. So the 40%, you're not going to put them to death. But what about their possessions? Their possessions are destroyed. But if they have possessions outside the city, you will not destroy those possessions. The nichse of the people who are not being killed, their possessions are destroyed. Shlala, v'loy shlal shemai. It has to be the possessions of the city, but not possessions belonging to heaven. Suppose somebody in the city had an animal that he consecrated for a carbon, so then it's not going to be destroyed. It's called shalola. All the possessions, the rabbis nichsin rushaim shebechutzla law. That in Russia, in other words, one of the guys who's getting the sreifa misa, not only his possessions that are in the city are destroyed, but even his possessions that are beyond the city limits are also going to get destroyed. Now, we just said that the possessions of the guy who's living in the city, he himself didn't do avodah zarah, yet his possessions are going to be destroyed. So Amar Reb Shimon asked the question, why did the Torah say, the possessions of somebody who didn't do avodah zarah, his possessions are destroyed. Why? He didn't do avodah zarah with the rest of the city. In fact, he stood up. I'm not doing it. I'm not following most of the city. But why is his possessions destroyed? The answer is because he's in a bad neighborhood. Who caused him to live there? Because it's their money. He wanted to live in a rich city. That's why his money is destroyed. You have to pick your neighbors. Amamar. We said that if a person who's being killed and he has possessions beyond the city, so then his possessions are destroyed. So how far away from the city? If you could move it right into the city in less than a day, then those possessions are considered part of the city, and you would burn it. But even though it's not in the city limits, but if it's just within a day's ride from the city, then you would burn those possessions. Rav Chizda said, that if someone deposited something with the people who are living in Ir Nidachas, mutarim, those don't get destroyed. So it says the Gemara, hey, who owns that possession that deposited it with the people of Ir Nidachas? If the possessions belong to another city and they're just temporarily putting it by the city of the Ir Nidachas, of course you're not going to destroy it. It's not the city, it's not the Ir Nidachas possession. Lav shlalahu, it doesn't belong to the Ir Nidachas. Veladithu visnai b'ir acheres. It must be that it's talking about it really belongs to somebody of the Ir Nidachas, and it's in another city. So even if it's in a day's, if it's within a day travel time to the Ir Nidachas, amay mutarim, then why is it mutar? It should be destroyed. If you can't bring it, if let's say the Russia's has possessions, but it's in a faraway city, so of course it's not going to be destroyed. Rabbi Chizda already told to us once. He says, but if it's not nikbatzim l'saycha, then you wouldn't burn it, even if it's in nichsei Russia. And says the Gemara, not so. It's talking about another city that somebody else put it inside the city. Now, so let's say somebody from the Ir Nidachas is watching something from another city. He's watching an animal belonging to another city. So really, you should not destroy that animal because it doesn't belong to the resident of the Ir Nidachas. But here we're talking about going to kabal alai achrayis. Since the guy took possession, he said that if it's lost, I'm responsible for it. So he gave insurance policy on the thing that he's watching. Mao the same even the kabbalah achrayis kidideda, but since he gave an insurance policy and guarantee to the item that he's watching, so it's like his own item, so we should destroy it. Kamash Malan, no, it still belongs to the original owner, which is somebody who's not a resident of the Ir Nidachas. Rav Chizda, another lesson, Rav Chizda. Behema, an animal, chetzi shel Ir Nidacha v'chetzi shel Ir acheres asura. An animal that half belongs to the Ir Nidachas people and half belongs to somebody else who belongs in another city, asura. It's asur, and you have to destroy it. Isa bado chetzi shel Ir Nidachas v'chetzi shel Ir acheres mutaris. If that doe that's half belonging to one city and half belonging to the Ir Nidachas, then it's mutar. My tama, what's the difference? Behema, an animal, commanded like plaguedami. It's not, you can't divide an animal so easy. So, but Isa, a doe, it's so easy, we consider it as is commanded plaguedami, as if it's divided up, and the Ir and Yidachas part is not mixed in with the thing that belongs to the other city. So therefore, the Isa is not Asa. Boy Rav Chizda asked another question. Behemas Ir and Yidachas mahu, the animal of an Ir and Yidachas. The animal of the Ir Nidachas has to be destroyed. But let's say somebody quickly shechted it. So now, when you shechted it, now the animal doesn't have the tumas nevela, because normally when an animal dies, it has a tumas nevela. If you shecht it, it doesn't have tuma nevela. So here, this animal was supposed to be destroyed anyway, but a guy went ahead and quickly shechted it. Is it tar from a nevela tuma? The Torah says destroy it with the sword. That doesn't matter if you stab it or if you shecht it. The Torah says destroy it, and that's it. So therefore, it's worthless, and it's still going to be tameh. Idilma, or maybe kiva de shachta, since you did something, a mitzvah of shechting it, even though it's going to be asabana, the shchita will at least help that it's not going to be metama people. What's the din? Teku. The Gemara remains unresolved. By Rav Yosef asked the question. Now we said possessions belonging to a guy who did not do the Avodah Zarah are destroyed. Seir Nashim Sikayis, but let's say his wife has long hair. What happens to that long hair? Do we ask her to shave it off to be destroyed? Maho, what's the din? Amarava, Hadarishiyas Asura. If it was the wife of somebody who actually did the Avodah Zarah, would it be asar? The only type of possessions you destroy in a city, it's tikbites v'srafta. All you have to do is gather it and burn it. Only something that all you have to do is gather it and burn it. But here on a woman, that's missing, that you have to shave it off and then gather it and burn it. That's not part of the things that need to be destroyed. So what are we talking about here? What is Rav Yosef's question? El Amar Rav Yosef b'pei nachris. A woman whose husband, let's say, didn't do the Avodah Zarah, is wearing a wig. Does she have to bring that wig to be burnt? Hey chedami, what's the case? Either mechuba gufa, if she's wearing the wig, kegufa dami, that's like her clothing, and of course we're not going to ask her to burn her clothing. Like tzricha, the tali b'sifti, it's on her like a sheitel head. So, do we consider it tzadikim shebesaycha? It's like the possessions belonging to the tzadikim, and therefore the possessions have to be the possession of a tzaddik are destroyed. So the wig on the sheitel head will also be destroyed. Va'aven, you have to get rid of it. Dilma, since keeping the eyelid enough, because since she generally it's meant to be put on, we consider it kalevusha dame, as if it's on her head, and therefore we would not burn it. That remains unresolved. You're supposed to burn all the possessions in the middle of the street. If it doesn't have a street, it does not become an ir nedachas. So if it doesn't have like a main street or a central avenue, you don't make an ir nedachas. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Kiva says, if it doesn't have a street, then you make one. What's the argument? Rabbi Shmuel says the Torah tells you burn it if only if it had a street from before. Rabbi Kiva alert, when it says street, it means if it was a street, then use that street, and if it didn't have a street, you use another street. Another 2 minutes, and then we will stop. Now, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Okay, let's do another minute, and then we'll stop. Well, I guess we'll stop and continue tomorrow. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Let's say a guy in the city had an animal. Okay, and let's say he made it for a carbon oil. Okay, and the whole city is going to be destroyed. Kachem is be'ah. So he said this animal should be in oil. So we're not going to destroy that animal because it's not really his animal. It really belongs for the Beis HaMikdash. So what do? Of an ir nedachas, you kill it. Kache bed the kabayas, if it's, let's say he consecrated, let's say a chair for the Beis HaMikdash, yipadu, we redeem it on money and you burn the chair. Utrumas, if somebody had truma in the ir nedachas, let's say he was a kohen, he had truma, yirkavu, we destroy it, we don't burn it. Umaisa sheni, the kisvei kodesh, let's say maisa sheni, or somebody had, let's say, a sefer Torah. You're not going to destroy it. You'll make a pit and you hide it. You bury it. Reb Shimon says, behemtov v'loy behemes b'char maisa. The animal belonging to the ir nedachas, but not the animals of a b'char or a meiser behema. Shlala, its possessions, prat lekesef, kesef, hegdish v'kesef meiser. We exclude the money of hegdish and the money of meiser. This is a brisa. And we're going to start tomorrow explaining the brisa, and Be'ez Hashem tomorrow we'll finish the Masechta. The Amud Beis is short, so we'll be able to catch up. Okay.
Thank you.